I'm Dave Hungerford. Lindamood-Bell helps students of all ages and abilities learn to their potential. Whether your child needs to catch up or get ahead, our unique, evidence-based instruction can help. We developed the imagery language foundation that's necessary for reading, comprehension, and math. Each student has a personalized plan tailored to their needs. Students attend in person or live online. Either way, our engaging, dynamic instruction helps kids make years of progress in just a few weeks. Learn more and get started at lindamoodbell.com or call 800-233-1819. Here's today's episode. Welcome to Lindamood-Bell Radio. Today I'm here with educational psychologist Dr. Liz Angoff. Dr. Liz, how are you?
Good.
Happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
You're based in the East Bay in Northern California. Tell me a little bit about your practice. What's your specialty?
So I specialize in neuropsych assessment for kids with learning and developmental differences. And I have a specialty in really helping kids understand their diagnosis or their profile and how to really understand and embrace their neurodiversity.
And you said helping kids understand that, as opposed to helping parents understand that, which I
so obviously, we do a lot of work to understand kids from the assessment perspective, and neuropsych assessment is really about going deep into understanding a child from a brain-based perspective. And then from there, we can help parents understand their child from a brain-based perspective, not just from the outside behavior or the challenges, but really looking at those underlying mechanisms. And at some point, parents started to ask me to explain all of this to their children because it was so powerful to finally understand, that's where all of this comes from. Now I understand how these things go together and why how my child's temper tantrums are related to their reading difficulties, and how this, kind of thing that's going on at home is related to the thing going on at school. And it's not 18 things going on with my child, but it's actually this processing difference that's making them see the world differently, interact with the world differently. And it's showing up as strengths in this area, and it's showing up as challenges in this other area, but it's all connected. Said, if my child just understood this, that would be so powerful. But it turns out that there's just not a lot in our field about talking to kids. And so a couple of years ago, I did a deep dive into trying to understand, see what there was, pulling from lots of different areas on how we talk to kids about hard things. And then created my, over a lot of trial and error, my own strategies for really talking directly to kids about dyslexia, about ADHD, about autism, and really helping them to understand what that means for them, which gives everybody a common language for talking about how, how these things show up in the world, both in their strengths and also the challenges that they face, in a way that feels very positive, empowering, and gets everybody on the same page.
It does seem like a lot of special services and support are provided at an altitude way above the kid, with all the adults, with the IEP teams and support teams and parents. And that's a good dive to take down into the world of the actual person that needs the support.
Isn't it fascinating how we do all of this stuff around the child? And it's so infrequent that we actually talk to the child about what's going on. I mean, just the nature of our tests are kind of, we're taught to, administer these tests in a very standardized way. And, when a kid gets a right answer, we say, thank you very much. And when they get a wrong answer, we say, thank you very much. And we're supposed to be kind of stoic and neutral and, kind and compassionate. I don't think there's any evaluator who's going, thank you, robotic, but, we're kind and compassionate, and get really excited, and kids get a prize when they walk out our door, but they kind of leave thinking, all right, I went through all that, and now the adults are talking behind my back, and they said it was games and fun, but not everything was that fun. And I got a prize, but now there's a lot of serious conversation going on, and there's a disconnect. Something must be really wrong. But when we're really transparent with kids and we actually talk to them, and what's your experience of your day-to-day life? This term lived experience is really important in the conversation around neurodiversity. And so we have to talk to kids directly about that lived experience to understand what's going on. And then when we have their words, we can use their language to talk to them about the interventions that they're going to get. And then it makes sense. And it turns out that those interventions are actually way more effective when kids know why they're in the intervention. And it's way easier to get them to go to that intervention when they understand, like, oh, this is helping me with that thing that we talked about, that I told Dr. Liz about. And they're co-collaborators in understanding their brain and co-collaborators in understanding the intervention. And I feel like our field has just missed this piece of talking directly to the child about their experience. And we're missing a big part of understanding a child if we don't talk to them.
You said a couple of years ago, you took a dive and did some research. Did you face any challenges when you started to put that into practice when actually talking with the kids?
Oh, God. There's a lot of trial and error that went into this. So there's one child in particular that really inspired this. And I had this great feedback meeting with his parents, where we really understood his learning disability. He's dyslexic, dysgraphic, so difficulty with reading and writing. We brought him in to explain it to him, and I read all the articles out there about using positive language and really starting from the kid's strengths and using a metaphor. There was a metaphor of traffic in the brain. And so I pulled up Google Maps and I was going to, have that visual with him, like make it visual, make it interactive. So we were going to look at different traffic patterns. And we started in on it and he just collapsed into tears and put his head down on the table and then ran out of my office. And I never saw him again. And I was thinking, God, this isn't right. This doesn't make sense. I did all of the things that it said, and yet this kid ran out of my office and we're not going to get to, talk to him. Like this doesn't make sense. And so I started to look at not only how do you explain a learning disability to kids, but how do you talk to kids about hard things? And so I pulled from Dr. Ross Greene wrote a book called The Explosive Child, and he is famous for saying kids do well if they can. And so in the way that we understand how they do well is by really empathizing with them around what is difficult and why, and understanding these challenges that they're facing. And so in these conversations, they happen over time. They're not a one-time thing. So as I started kind of developing these practices, I kept bringing it back and back and back and realizing that we have to start the assessment process by involving the child in the very questions that we're asking that brought us to the assessment. They need their own assessment questions. Then they know why we're doing the testing. And then during testing, we need to be talking to kids about their experience. So not only me as the assessor saying, like, what was that like for you? And how did you do that? What strategy did you use? But actually prompting parents to ask after the testing session's over, what was that like for you? What was tiring? What was fun? And so we're all getting information directly from the child about their experience with these different activities. And then we're gathering the child's language so that when we get to that feedback session, that moment where I say, listen, like we learned some really cool things about you that help us understand how you learn, I'm able to do that using their language and their words. And this is what invests them in that collaborative process to create solutions, and it makes it make sense. So it's not overwhelming. So they don't feel like it's not a hit to their self-esteem. It feels empowering because they're hearing their words back at them. And they're hearing, yes, somebody understood me. So hearing I'm dyslexic becomes, instead of like something's broken and I feel awful about myself, it actually becomes somebody understands me. There's more people in the world like me, and the adults know what to do to help. Sign me up. And so it came from a lot of that work around how we empathize with kids it came from understanding how learning works and that we need over time, and also just interviewing hundreds of psychologists across the world of what makes these conversations hard, and trying to nip all that in the bud to make sure that it's not overwhelming, that we're helping kids in a way that's really validating, and that we're building these conversations over time and preparing caregivers so that parents and teachers and family members are able to continue supporting the child as they understand themselves, and that evolves over time.
So for the uninitiated, what are kind of the categories of things that you look at in these evaluations?
So I think that the main thing is really understanding what the assessment question is, as I said. And that is going to come from parents, but also from teachers and from the child themselves. What's the problem? What are the things that are challenging? And then we're going to look at things that are going to answer those questions for us. So for many kids who struggle with learning challenges, we're going to look at their overall problem solving abilities and how they how they're able to access knowledge that they've accumulated over time, but also how they're able to do things that they've never seen before. And we're looking at different types of processes. And what our tests do is that they do their best to try and kind of isolate things like how we process auditory information or what we hear, how we process what we see, how we remember different types of information, how we hold on to that, how we access it, how we use those things. And so the tests are looking at those executive functioning skills like organization and shifting attention. But the truth is that any one test, it can't isolate one process. So we have to look at patterns throughout all the testing. And one of the things that's so powerful is that when we ask kids, how did you do that? What strategies did you use? What was hard? What wasn't? What was tiring? What was exciting? We start to see another layer of pattern that helps us understand how kids are approaching different tasks. And so we have the tests that give us the data for what comes more easily to kids and what's more challenging. And then we have the information from kids about what strategies they use, which is going to feed into our interventions and recommendations of how to really support this child and build on the things they're already naturally doing.
You find in general that the self-reporting with students on how they process something is kind of correlates to their success on a particular task?
That is such a great question, because sometimes they are spot on and sometimes there is some interpretation. So I'll ask kids, my favorite thing to do is after giving them a lot of different types of memory tests, I'll ask them, how do you think you did? Or like, what came easily, what was harder? And sometimes they're right on. They say, oh, it was really easy to remember that list of words. That was really fun and challenging for me. It was a fun kind of challenge, but the stories were like so boring. And if we look at the scores, we see that the words, remembering a list of words was really high and the stories was really low. So we can validate that. Sometimes though, it's the reverse. And I actually find this so interesting, because then we get to unpack it even further. So they say like, oh, the list of words was really easy, but the stories were, super boring. And so I say, actually, it's interesting because the stories actually seem to come more easily to you than the word list. And I'm wondering more about that. Like you said, that was really hard for you. Can you tell me more about what was challenging about it? And then it turns out that they expected themselves to remember it verbatim. So now we've kind of uncovered this maybe a flavor of perfectionism. Or maybe the frustration of like, oh, I forgot that. Like, I know that there's one piece and I forgot it. And then we look at their retrieval skills, and it's actually hard for them to kind of retrieve information, and they're really sensitive to it. And so we start to see that. Or we can get it at strategies. Like it turns out that they were really confident about their strategy for the word list, but they didn't have one for the stories. And while there's a natural maybe strength there, it was not as intentional as, the other things that are going on. And these are the kinds of conversations that really empower kids, because they're starting to get curious too about, oh, why was that easier for me? Or isn't that interesting? It felt more challenging, but I actually remembered more than most kids. That's really interesting. And now we're all scratching our heads together. And so these are the times when kids are really authentic collaborators in understanding their brains. And I love these moments where what I see is different from what the kid says, because now we get to even go deeper and figure out what is going on. And it's so fun to watch kids just light up with like, oh, wait, I had an insight. And it just makes the assessment process so much more powerful.
I think we find that in our learning centers as well, that if the kids have kind of that meta view of, or especially being reading and comprehension, and if they're understanding we explain how the programs work, we're going to make you picture something to match these words, and that's how you're going to understand it. So they have that kind of meta view of things. It seems to produce buy-in and a lot of positive energy for their work too.
Exactly.
So tell me about some of the support and things that you supply yourself that you do for your practice.
Yeah. So in my experience doing this work, I started to develop a lot of scripts and tools that I use with kids. And because there's so little out there, other practitioners became really excited about it. And now I'm creating a lot of resources specifically for parents, because so few practitioners have these conversations directly with kids. A lot of parents are wanting to do this on their own, or know how to ask for these things from the practitioners that they work with. And so I have a number of free resources on my website. So if you go to explainingbrains.com/parents, you'll see that there is a blog on how to explain neurodiversity to kids. So we have how to explain dyslexia to kids, how to explain ADHD to kids, autism, behavior challenges, anxiety, intellectual disability, or if a child has multiple diagnoses, how do you have that conversation? And in those articles, like I said, I needed scripts. I needed to know exactly what to say. And so it's literally say this, which gives parents and practitioners a starting place, and then it's easier to adapt what's already there than come up with it on your own. So it's exactly say this. This is how it goes. And I use a metaphor of a brain under construction, which really incorporates a lot of growth mindset. And I'm working towards something. I don't have strengths and deficits. I have things that I've built and things that I'm building. And so we're always in process. And so it shows you exactly how to talk to your kids using that metaphor. And then I also have just a growing spreadsheet, which is a database of all kinds of different videos, visuals, books that are great for kids of all ages, and to help them help them understand their neurotype or the way that their brain works, and also see that there are lots of other people who have the same experiences that they do. And that concept of I'm not alone is so critical for kids. So there is, it's called the visuals and videos spreadsheet. And it's got, again, for all kinds of different profiles, including just general neurodiversity. Because sometimes kids don't have a firm diagnosis yet. Sometimes they're too young to really have something decisive. Or sometimes we know as parents that something's different, but we don't know exactly what the name is yet. And so just starting the conversation with kids about neurodiversity is so important, because otherwise they create their own narratives. And those narratives are so often, they're negative, they're harmful. It's like my kid who ran out of my office crying, because that narrative was so powerful and he was so scared that I was about to confirm that he's broken in some way. And we hadn't done that work of understanding his language, of unpacking his experience. We didn't do that yet. I didn't know that yet. So the sooner that we start these conversations, the more critical it is. And then the resource that's coming up really soon, I'm creating a guide to what's next. So after your child's been evaluated, a lot of times you have a great report, but it's hard to know what to do next. You have a ton of pages of recommendations, but where do you start? And so this is an online guide that really walks parents through how to understand the report, how to make sense of the recommendations, where to go for support, how to find those resources online for your child, for you, how to and understanding, what's going on with your child. And these resources are evolving all of the time. How to prepare your kids for testing, and again, lots more coming. You can also find me on Instagram at Explaining Brains. And I'm always posting kind of ways that we talk to kids about these differences and empowering in really supportive ways that hopefully is helpful for getting that language for, talking to your kids.
Really important to move past just having a label, isn't it? You have just the label of dyslexic. I've traveled quite a bit with our organization in different school districts, and you'd have a district where you wanted your kid to be labeled dyslexic, so you get the special services, but the district next door defined things completely differently, and you did not want to get your kid labeled dyslexic because they would not have their needs taken care of. So I hear you say that it sounds like your language is moving far past that, even though I presume you have the ability to kind of put into a main category, but you want to move past the label.
Oh, it's such a good point, because the way that we describe, the way that we diagnose kids is based on their deficits and a list of things that they can't do. But if we want a kid to understand their brain, we have to understand what they can do or how they can do the things that are hard for them. And so that's very different than just defining a diagnosis. And so my focus has really been on how do we understand a child's lived experience of their brain so we can help them understand what dyslexia means for them. And that sounds different than the DSM diagnosis. It sounds different than your educational diagnosis. And it's also getting away from that deficit-focused, do you qualify perspective, which for intents and purposes, it serves a purpose for insurance companies and getting your child qualified and all of that, but it doesn't help us help our child understand their brain. It doesn't help us empower our children to really embrace intervention and to do things that are going to help them and use strategies. It doesn't help. So if we can take that as a starting point, but then help our children understand themselves in their own words, then I think we move ourselves much further along the path of supporting our kids and getting them the help that they need.
In talking with your colleagues and in your own experience, have you noticed a kind of a post-COVID pandemic change in the sheer percentage of issues that have coming to light for young people?
Yeah, I think that COVID put us all under stress. And our brains work differently under stress. And I think for a lot of kids who maybe had some, vulnerabilities that were not seen before, when we went under the stress of COVID and the lockdown, these things started to come out in really, really powerful ways. And for some kids, it meant that during COVID, they really struggled. And now that we're back, they're doing great again. And so there was a lot of concern at that time. But as things kind of got back to normal, so did they. And they were able to kind of get back on track. For some kids, COVID really put a spotlight on the ways that they were struggling and how hard they were working to get through the typical school day. And parents were able to see how hard they're working. And it actually gave us an opportunity to identify things that were going undetected and help kids with that narrative, because these kids know something's awry before we do. They feel it before we notice. So I think COVID silver lining is that it put a spotlight on some of these things and really helped parents to see that, something's different here. We need to do something differently. And it gives us this opportunity to really intervene with kids and start to shift that narrative from some version of I'm broken, I hope nobody notices, to, I do things differently. And that's actually pretty awesome. And I can do something about it and I can advocate for myself. And so if we take that as an opportunity, we're really helping kids to shift their understanding of their brain, whether they're clinically significant for a diagnosis, or if we just learn that, when you're under stress, your brain has a hard time with these things. And so this is something that's good to know about yourself moving forward so we can really support you, whatever level that looks like. I think my experience is that we have been able to highlight and we've been forced to talk about a lot of things that were going under the radar before COVID hit. And now we have to find a new way of understanding all of these variations in the way that brains process information, make accommodations so that it's part of our standard practice to really support neurodiversity and really celebrate that we do learn differently. And then when kids are in a position where there's enough differences that causes significant challenges with the day-to-day, that we're able to identify that really quickly and get in there to make sure that they have the supports that they need beyond the standard classroom. So I think COVID's given us an opportunity to be more flexible within general education and get quicker about identifying when kids need something beyond what's available within general education. So I think that the main thing that I want parents to walk away with is that when we find ways to really talk directly to kids about their differences and really understand the language that kids are using to understand their daily lived experiences of their brains, that this really helps us. It opens the door to collaborating with them on solutions and getting kids really invested in the interventions that are going to help them. And when we can work with kids as respected co-collaborators in building their brains, our chances of success are so much higher. And even more importantly, our children's self-esteem is not only preserved, but is bolstered by being curious about how things work and not defensive or scared that we're going to find out something's different.
I would imagine for many kids, it's they've not had that opportunity to really be open and frank about themselves. It's been always searching for the right answer that the adult wants to hear.
Right. And so, if we want to shift that narrative, that is the purpose of the resources that I'm putting out there. So I really encourage your listeners to go make use of those resources. Let me know what else you need. This is a dynamic website that I'm really trying to create new things for parents to really be helpful for supporting your kids, because there's a lot out there, but it's just hard to navigate. And so I really want to make sure there's some solid, concrete, what do I do next? What do I do now? What do I say? Kinds of tools. So again, explainingbrains.com/parents, all those resources are there, downloadable for free. And please feel free to reach out to me. There's a contact link on the website as well to let me know what other kinds of resources can be helpful on your journey.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for listening. Learn more about us at Lindamood-Bell.com. You can also find us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are Lindamood-Bell.